Coming up on today's edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast, one day away from Eagles training camp. So Gino and I, we're going to predict the 53-man roster pre-training camp predictions right here on this Monday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
For making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Shout out to the everydayers Monday through Friday for making us your first listen. We're always part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Louis DiBiase, joined as always by my co-host Gino Camilleri. And today's show is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. Locked On NFL terms and conditions do apply. So, Gino, on today's edition of the podcast, man, we're going to predict the 53-man roster before training camp gets going and all these, starting jobs, the battles begin for those, and the push to make the 53 begins. And as you mentioned on the show last week, the difference this year compared to last year, there's not the multiple cutdowns like there used to be. It's kind of just a purge from, 90 to 53. So it's going to all hit pretty quick.
And the thing about that is your pro personnel department has to be ready to roll, because we always know that after that first cutdown day, there's a second cutdown day. And I really believe that they should make the 53 official after that second day of waivers, because we know how many guys and how many teams are willing to take a 53rd guy on a better team's roster than their own roster.
Right, you're never safe if you make it initially. There's always a grace period there where you got to see if you survive.
There always is, and we come to find out that the Eagles are going to get Jim Nantz and Tony Romo on that first call. If you're on that 53 after the first cutdowns, you might not even play in that first game, right? And now with the 16 practice squad spots with 4 veteran spots as well, it makes things so interesting when it comes to compiling talent and where you're going to go light, where you're going to go heavy, where you believe that you have a guy that will make it through waivers and make it to the practice squad, because that's how many guys, Lou? From 90 to 53, that's 37 guys that you're cutting down. That's a whole ton of jobs that are going to be lost. But then the next day, you're going to see a percentage of those guys get jobs on other teams. And we've seen that in the past. Guys like Bryce Treggs, the Eagles have claimed in the past, and they continue to do that because they want to win in the margins. I think a lot of the decisions up top on this roster are pretty simple. But when it comes to the back end,
it's tough, man.
Special teams, it really was a difficult decision to cut it down to 50.
Yeah, so Gino and I, before the show, we together broke this down from 90 to 53. We did our predictions together. So we're going to unveil that now. And yeah, I agree with you. I mean, it was pretty easy, the first, multiple players at each position. But then you're like, man, all right, edge rusher, we're at number 6 here. Who do we cut? I think there's going to be some really tough roster cuts the Eagles have to make, some tough decisions in August. So let's begin. We're going to start here on offense. We'll predict the 53 on offense in segment 1. Segment 2, we'll do defense, and then we'll kind of recap everything to round out the show. And Gino, to start, we got to go with quarterback, and we did not end up keeping a third quarterback, neither 6th-round pick out of Stanford, Tanner McKee, or Ian Book, who was with the team last year. I just don't think, you look at the roster and all the tough decisions you have to make, I'd rather go heavy at other positions than go with a third quarterback. I just don't think McKee or Book are going to be worth it compared to what kind of talent you could probably stash away on the practice squad. And I think you could probably get at least one of them to be on the practice squad anyway. So I just don't, I don't want to keep a third guy. I just don't think it's worth it, to be honest with you.
And you have to go back to the days of Nate Sudfeld, like 5-6 years ago, when they really cared about keeping that third guy on the 53 because they knew Nate would probably have been poached.
Right.
But when you look at Tanner McKee, you look at Ian Book, those guys are prime practice squad candidates. A lot of the times, the guys that are signed or are drafted at that quarterback position, there's like a gentleman's agreement in the NFL that they kind of just let these guys pass through to the practice squad. And I think those guys you have philosophically kept 2 active on game day. Now with that third, I don't think it warrants even keeping a third guy on the roster.
It's interesting. I never thought of it that way. It's kind of like in hockey. If you're a restricted free agent, there's like the offer sheet,
Yeah, they won't
agreement
offer
where
sheet
you
you.
don't
Exactly.
offer sheet them. Yeah, that's actually kind of funny. I never really thought of it that way, but it's true. So we went with Jalen Hurts and Marcus Mariota at quarterback on the original 53. At running back, Gino, not a lot of surprises either. We kept 4. DeAndre Swift, Rashad Penny, Kenneth Gainwell, and Boston Scott are your 4 backs. Tough call here, cutting Trey Sermon, a former third-round pick that I think we both like a lot, is very efficient when he's on the field, but I just can't imagine, unless Rashad Penny keeps getting hurt in the summer and you're like, okay, this kid just clearly can't stay healthy. We have no guaranteed money anyway. Let's cut our ties. I can't imagine, though, Sermon beating out any of them with a fair shot if everybody's healthy, even Boston Scott. I think this team likes him too much for how long he's been here. Veteran leader, as you mentioned before, the giant killer, those 2 games alone, he's got return ability, good in the open field. So, as good of a talent as Sermon is, I just don't think he cracks his 53, but I definitely think he, gets on with another team, I think, by the end of the summer.
You took the words right out of my mouth. He's prime poach territory, right?
100%.
Kennedy Brooks seems like a prime practice squad candidate. And the thing about this position, Lou, they tend to bring in guys outside of that 90-man roster into the running back position once those cut downs happen. I forgot who they did it with last year, but they love to just continue to have multiple backs on their practice squad. And with the 4 that you have, I mean, you're really playing with house money when it comes to that position. I think it's pretty easy with the 4 guys up top.
Yeah,
you're going to have to moneyball this position to death. And with that offensive line, I don't think it's the biggest concern, especially with the 4 guys and the value that you got. And you look at what Melvin Gordon just signed for at $3.1 million, and these guys are making just around that same amount of money.
Isn't that ridiculous?
Howie did a great job.
I totally agree. Yeah, that 4, that's a great backfield for dirt cheap. And don't think there's a lot of questions at quarterback or running back. At wide receiver, Gino, we went with 5. We went with A.J. Brown, DeVonta Smith, Quez Watkins, Olamide Zacchaeus. Really no questions there with your top 4. Zacchaeus replacing Zach Pascal as that 3A, 3B guy in 2023. And then the 5th receiver we kept was Britain Covey for that, return ability, was your main punt returner last year. Hopefully he can improve in that area in year 2. That gives him the upper hand playing special teams over some of these undrafted kids. So, I don't think there's a whole lot of competition I like that's going to push, that bottom half of the group. So I think this one's pretty easy too.
And as the incumbent, Covey is coming in with a full offseason under his belt as well. And you see his ability as a short area mover.
Got better as the year went on.
Into that slot receiver type of role while being a key special teamer for you as well. I think it's hard for the Jaden Hazelwoods of the world and the Nadas and all the guys, the Charleston Rambos that they brought in, even Devin Allen, unless they can really push Covey at that special teams role, and they look unbelievably good at the wide receiver position in those 3 preseason games and one-on-ones when you're going against starters. I think the 5 that you have right now are going to be the 5 that you roll with into the season. And I think you're in an excellent spot with these 5 because the big 2 are going to push the envelope to be even better than they were last year. Zacchaeus should push Watkins to at least get 3rd wide receiver outcomes and productivity from both of these guys. And then Covey, key special teamer, unless somebody beats him out. But who will beat him out? That's the question.
Yeah, and I don't think there's a 6th guy to... I don't really think there's one worth keeping. I mean, Nada, they did pay more money guaranteed than I think any undrafted rookie this year in the class. So that's actually interesting. And he is a big bodied receiver that maybe if he turns some heads, he can convince the Eagles to keep a number 6. But even last year, Gino, you look at some guys like, I think it was Deion Kane that was playing in the summer, and he looked pretty good, and it still didn't matter. So Devin Allen, also somebody pushing. He's got return ability, world-class speed. He's the guy I think to watch out for if Covey doesn't make the roster. I think it's because Devin Allen beat him out as a returner. So I think Devin Allen's a guy to keep a close eye on, but I think Covey right now has got that 5th spot pretty much down pat, locked in as of right now before camp starts. All right, Gino, let's round out the offensive side of the football as we continue to predict the 53-man roster. With the offensive line, we're going with 9. And I don't think a lot of surprises here really either. Of course, your starting five, Jordan Mailata, Landon Dickerson, Jason Kelce, Cam Jurgens is our projected right guard, Lane Johnson. Then your backups, of course, Tyler Steen, your third-round pick, Dennis Kelly, who you just brought in last week, a versatile lineman, a veteran with 54 starts under his belt, can play both guard and tackle, one of your swing linemen on the bench, Jack Driscoll, and then Sua Opeta. I don't think any big questions there. That's a pretty damn looking group. I think Dennis Kelly makes me feel even better about that bench because you really didn't have like a veteran starter back there. It was all young potential, which I like, but I think Dennis Kelly, rounding that out over Brett Toth is a big upgrade.
Can't forget about tight end too, Lou. You're going to leave out an entire position group.
Oh, of course. I'm so sorry. Yeah, no, of course.
We got to talk about the other bruisers on the other side of the ball.
No.
O-line, I think you're pretty solid. And with the tight ends that you are going to bring in who are excellent as blockers as well, Dennis Kelly brings you a sense of depth as a veteran type of player. Tyler Steen, you can really mold him into whatever position you want him to be with Jeff Stoutland leading the way with him. Sua Opeta, I saw Jimmy Kempski left him off his 53. I thought that was an interesting pick, but Opeta, Jeff Stoutland trusts this guy, and he's played in some big-time games for this team over the last couple of years, and he might not be the best pass protector, but he's physical inside. He's got good feet, in my opinion, and you can make it work. As your ninth guy, exactly.
Yeah, I'll totally take that.
Toth might be the 10th guy if they do keep it, or Cameron Tom as a true center, but I don't see that happening.
All right, Gino, tight end, we kept three. Dallas Goedert, Dan Arnold, and Jack Stahl. We went with, I think Arnold right now has the leg up on everybody else just based on experience as a pass-catching tight end to be that number 2 behind Goedert. We went with Stahl over Calcaterra because to me, I think Stahl, the thing is with him, he played a lot last year, right? He has that run blocking you can rely on. He improved as a receiver. So to me, if Calcaterra can't beat out Arnold, I don't know. To me, that's the spot he's got to target as like that second receiving tight end. And I think right now Arnold is the favorite heading into camp.
And this one was tough for me, and why I went with Arnold, and I think we might both have, is because of his positional value as both of a big slot receiver and as a tight end. So you're kind of getting away with keeping 5 wide receivers because you can rely now on hopefully having Arnold as that potential second tight end as well as Dallas Goedert. And Jack Stoll, if you go 9 on the offensive line, you want to keep technically a 10th offensive lineman. Jack Stoll, you can do a lot of great things blocking, and he might be a key piece when it comes to just as a chess piece, moving him around, if he can develop more of his pass catching ability. Because when you look at when they're in 13 personnel, let's say, and he's on the field, do they go run heavy? But all of a sudden, if he can develop into a wide receiving threat and you could take away that tendency of when he's on the field, it's just a rundown, I think that could really open up things as well. And it's winning in the margins is what we're talking about. The top of the roster, especially on offense, I think it's clear just what will those back end positions turn out to be.
All right, Gino, we'll continue our 53-man roster predictions pre-training camp edition with defense coming up next right here on Locked On Eagles. And guys, today's show is sponsored by LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you got to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. Head over to LinkedIn Jobs, then add your job in the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and then eventually hire. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs number 1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions do apply. All right, Eagles fans, we're continuing on this Monday edition of Locked On Eagles. Happy Training Camp Eve. Eagles players report to the NovaCare complex tomorrow to begin the 2023 season with training camp. And of course, today, right before camp, we got to do our pre-camp 53-man roster predictions. We started with offense. Gino, I think the bigger questions now, there are some questions on offense. Can a third quarterback be kept? Who's that last offensive lineman? Is it Sua Opeta? Is it Brett Toth? You look at tight end. Is it Dan Arnold? Is it Grant Calcaterra or Jack Stahl? Can Tyree Jackson stay healthy this year and show his potential from 2 summers ago and push those guys? But I think the bigger questions are on defense because I think they want to go heavy with linemen and defensive backs. But there are a lot of candidates after your main starters. It's like there's so many young guys that are battling for positions. And so we made some calls, and it definitely was tough. Like you look at edge where we'll start. We went with Hassan Reddick, Josh Sweat, Brandon Graham, and Nolan Smith. No shocker there with your top 4. But then we cut Derek Barnett, who's a longtime role player of this team since 2017. We went with both Johnsons, Kyron Johnson and Patrick Johnson, because of special teams. I think more versatility and space, to be a stand-up player as well. They can line up in different spots. But Derek Barnett's a former first-round pick that has a lot of playing experience, so I think that's going to be a tough call. But I think this is the right call going with the Johnsons.
I think the tougher call is cutting Teron Jackson over Derek Barnett, in my opinion.
I agree with you. I've wanted Barnett gone for years. I think the Eagles, though, it's going to be a tough call for Howie.
Yeah, I don't really believe that, especially with the depth. People aren't even thinking about this guy at that point, and he wants to keep his younger draft picks. And the reason I kept Kyron Johnson is because his cross-training at a off-ball linebacker position currently, he might be your other will linebacker in some situations. Patrick Johnson, I think he's been just too good for you in big games in the Super Bowl. He made some key plays for you at times in the playoffs. He has as well. And he's a key special teamer. He's a big body. He could play that Sam role behind Hassan Reddick. And then you have those 3 guys on the edge, and you could really do whatever you want with Hassan Reddick, Josh Sweat, Brandon Graham. Move those guys around everywhere. And Nolan Smith, man, he's truly going to be not a Micah Parsons when it comes to productivity, but what you can do when you line him up clearly over their weakest link and say, get to the quarterback.
I totally agree. Yeah, that's a good-looking group of 6. And like you mentioned, with Kyron Johnson, is he can play, stand-up inside linebacker too with that cross-training. So again, there's versatility in special teams. And Derek Barnett, he's just not worth keeping, especially as your 5th guy. I mean, the liability he is on defense with penalties, I think it's time to move on. If you can get a trade for him, maybe if he looks okay in the summer, I would pretty much take anything at this point. Gino, we went heavy with linemen, though. We kept six edge rushers and 6 defensive tackles. Fletcher Cox, Jordan Davis, Jalen Carter, Milton Williams, they're your top 4 in that rotation. Then to be Jordan Davis's backup, the replacement for Linval Joseph, Marlon Tuipulotu comes back from injury last year, was on IR the second half of the year, but looked pretty good in the first half and really improved, I thought, his pass rushing. Then we kept Contavious Street, the veteran you signed from the New Orleans Saints, and then your 7th-round rookie from Texas, Moro Ajomo. So we overall kept 12 guys that are going to go after the quarterback, and I don't think that's surprising considering the investments Philly's made at these spots. And that overall with 9 offensive linemen too, that's 21 linemen they're keeping. But this roster, that's where the talent is. So,
and you keep your best players. You keep the 53 best players. And we were talking about that last week. And when I was building this out, I did it a little more 30,000 foot than we have here on the show. I didn't even say edge or defensive tackle or interior defensive lineman. I just said defensive lineman, and then I said defensive back, because what Sean Desai is going to look for, as well as Howie Roseman, is the versatility, especially in these young players, the Moro Ajomos of the world. Can you play multiple inside positions? Can Marlon play anything more than a 0 or a 1 tech? And that's what you're going to want to see, and that's why they love Fletcher Cox. That's why they love Jordan Davis and Jalen Carter and Milton Williams, because you can move those guys all around, and that's the anchor point. It works from the inside out, and then your edge rushers are going to be able to do a whole bunch of things when it comes to getting to the passer, when it comes to protecting the pass as stand-up guys, when it comes to dropping into zone. Yeah. And you just can't be a Derek Barnett who's a 5-tech edge rusher who can't play inside. Right. He can't go outside because he lacks speed. You have to be multiple, especially on defense, and especially playing for Sean Desai.
I'm excited. I think Contavious Street, he's coming off the best year of his career when it comes to getting to the quarterback career high in sacks with New Orleans. And Ajomo is somebody that, he's a 7th-round pick. I wouldn't have been surprised if he was like a 3rd-rounder. So I think he's worth keeping over a 5th linebacker or wherever you go. I'd much rather go heavy with these linemen and pass rushers on the edge and inside. And so, Gino, we did go lighter at linebacker. Of course, Kyron Johnson you could throw in here, as you mentioned, because of the cross-training. But I threw him in an edge where where his more, traditional position has been since they drafted him 2 years ago. So, at inside linebacker, we went with Nakobe Dean and Nicholas Morrow, your two starters. And then, of course, Christian Ellis, who's a main special teamer, who, some are expecting is going to impress this year at camp. And then Sean Bradley. So no Davian Taylor here. I wouldn't be surprised, again, as we mentioned last week when we were previewing linebacker, if they brought in somebody else. Patrick Queen, Isaiah Simmons, somebody like that. But for now, Gino, I think this is the main four, and yeah, I think it's a pretty thin group.
So I would say Christian Ellis is the only guy that I think I would keep off the roster as opposed to Kyron Johnson, because Kyron is such a better athlete. I studied Christian Ellis's college tape coming out, and he's very stiff. Like, he is a good key teamer, but I don't think he deserves to be on the roster if nobody can beat him out because he's simply a linebacker. I said that last week. Dean Morrow, Bradley key special teamer. Can he be potentially an LJ Fort type of off-ball linebacker that I think you can at least get good enough play out of to warrant him keeping a spot? And I really think Kyron Johnson's ability to play off ball is going to come up in big key situations as a sub-package player. Christian Ellis, I see what you're saying, but you got to upgrade at that position. I would put a question mark there. You got to find another linebacker that you can rely on.
I'm with you, but right now you don't have them. And
right,
I just can't, and you can't keep just three guys that have, played this position for more than a year with Dean, Morrow, and Bradley. So just by default right now, I mean, again, I'm not an Ellis guy either, but maybe Davian Taylor can beat him out. But yeah, right now this group, I mean, it looks pretty thin. Gino at corner, we went with a heavier group. We went with 6. Darius Slay, James Bradberry, Avonte Maddox, Kelee Ringo, of course, Greedy Williams, who you signed from Cleveland this year, Zach McPherson, and we kept Eli Ricks, the undrafted rookie from Alabama. I think that's a good group. There's a lot of young talent there battling between Ringo, Williams, McPherson. We went with Ricks over Josh Jobe. It's really a toss-up there between the two former Alabama kids. Jobe had a really good summer last year. It pushed him into the 53-man roster. Ricks didn't allow a single touchdown in coverage last year. I love that length and athleticism, that combination. I think it's really interesting to keep someone developmental like that on the bench. And, I'm not saying he's going to be the next Tariq Woolen for you, but I think that's a nice piece to have to round out the position.
Yeah, here as well with Kelee Ringo, I'm picturing him more as a star / safety / does everything type of defensive back. I wouldn't just put him into that cornerback slot. Eli Ricks, does he present more coverage ability than Josh Jobe, who this team trusted in some moments down the stretch last year in the regular season? That will be one of those battles that you're looking at. And I think that 6th cornerback position or 12th defensive back or 11th defensive back, however many you keep, is going to be such an intriguing battle on what they value. Do you value body size? Do you value body profile? Do you value play speed? Do you value what scouting aspect are you going to value at that back half of the roster? That's going to be very intriguing.
Yeah, I agree. Gino, at safety here, a little bit lighter with Terrell Edmonds, Reed Blankenship. We kept Sidney Brown, of course, the 3rd rounder that I think is going to be, by the end of the year, your best safety. And then, of course, Justin Evans from New Orleans, who you signed in free agency this year. So, overall, this is a lighter group, but I think you go a little bit heavier at corner. Ringo has versatility. I think he can play safety. Avonte Maddox as well. Worst comes to worst, you can cross-train in that way. So I think at safety, those are probably your main 4, and I don't know if Kevon Walls is worth keeping on the roster this year.
Justin Evans, if he's healthy, has a legitimate chance to be that 4th guy because he can play some minutes in a defense that is going to look very similar to what you run this year with what New Orleans had and their versatility in their defensive back last year. And that was his problem, is he couldn't remain healthy. But if he is, put together some pretty impressive seasons where Kevon Wallace, can you trust him at this point? That I don't know. And they seem to, he was on the field in the playoffs for this team, Lou, which is crazy to say. And I would love to have been in this situation last year, which we were talking about, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson and even Marcus Epps, who he's going to kill it in Las Vegas, I feel. I just am so sad of where we are now with this roster position when it comes to the safety position. But ultimately, you got to rely on the approach and the philosophical stance that Howie Roseman has taken at linebacker, at safety, at positions like running back, to where the defensive line and the offensive line you can keep and justify keeping 21, 22 players, because you do go light at those other spots because you're not paying the CGJs of the world. And I'm very excited to see how well this team does in the preseason. They haven't been the best preseason team in the past, even with talented rosters. So we'll see how they go out and produce. I think the individual battles when it comes to those inter squad practices are where you should focus your attention moving forward.
So Gino, and then of course you got your main three special teamers, Elliott, Sip, and Lovato. The punting game.
Did you just call him Sip? Like you gave this guy a nickname that he was warranted? This guy who is absolutely an abysmal punter that they should look to upgrade.
Hey man, trust me. I want. I know that is. I actually am ashamed that I gave this punter a nickname. But with those three, I actually did a math error here, which is not surprising. We're at 52, so we actually have a bonus roster spot here.
Nice.
Do we want to keep, would it be Josh Jobe? Like, is that our preference to go heavier at corner? Where would that extra spot be? I didn't even realize that we have one extra spot.
Who's the 53rd or the number one guy that we have left off of this roster when it comes to talent?
And maybe it's Jobe at corner. I don't know. I mean, I don't think there's anybody else on offense that I would keep. Maybe Trey Sermon, but I can't justify keeping five backs though. To me, based
maybe
on our
Calcaterra because he's a 5th round pick and they don't want to subject him to going to the practice
maybe
squad.
Do we keep a 10th lineman?
Or Cameron Tom because they love his pure center ability. Or
I picked Ricks and Ajomo. I talked you into those guys.
I like Josh Jobe.
I'll let you make the call. If you want it, you had Jobe. That was the one difference we had in our predictions. I had Ricks at corner and you had Jobe. So Josh Jobe will keep us, since we're going lighter at safety with 4,
because I think
keep
Keelee's
that 7th corner.
Keelee's going to be more of a middle of a field type of player as to a boundary type of player. So let's go with Josh Jobe. So we end up with 53 guys. And heck, man, that's a talented roster, Lou. And when you're picking and nitpicking the 48th, 49th, 50th guy on the roster, and those guys might not even play because you got to sit 6 of them on game day, right? You're not even dressing all these guys. And is there talent out there that you could warrant bringing in at a position like linebacker, a position like safety, that one of these guys where we thought they might have a big role going into this year might not see the field at all? Like Nicholas Morrow, Lou, if they bring in a linebacker up to Patrick Queen's caliber, or even somebody that's a better football player than Morrow, who did okay for Chicago last year, but there's a reason he's not a Chicago Bear, because Chicago wanted to upgrade and the Eagles go cheap. So can I see somebody else coming in?
They said
exactly.
We'll pay TJ Edwards and you can have Morrow. So I mean, I'm with you. And the good news is with a lot of these players like Morrow, you can find out what you have in the summer, and there's not a lot of guaranteed money in most of these contracts, with a lot of them on rookie deals, a lot of them on prove-it signings too. You know, a Greedy Williams, if he just looks abysmal, and Eli Ricks and Josh Jobe are turning heads, and they do end up keeping a 5th safety like a Wallace, you could decide on, you know, somebody like Greedy. So I think it's a big summer for a lot of these depth pieces for sure. I think some of the main guys, you know, to round out the show that were like the hardest to cut, or maybe not the hardest to cut, but the closest when it comes to actually what we think the Eagles might do. I think the main names that come to mind, Calcaterra for sure at tight end, you know, seeing that battle. We kept Dan Arnold instead and Jack Stahl. I would say Brett Toth probably right. Maybe that 10th lineman. Anybody on defense you think was like a close call?
I still think Teron Jackson's good enough to be on a 53-man roster in this league, and it just stinks because they're so deep at that position.
I agree. Derek Barnett's the biggest name, but again, I had no issues cutting him.
Yeah, maybe Kavon Wallace because of the difference of the defensive coordinator not being tied to the player, where the front office is tied to the player. Sure. That'll be a very interesting discussion to have.
Yeah, it's true.
I think Grant Calcaterra is, to me, the big one, and maybe even the 3rd quarterback. Like, does one of these guys come out here and impress?
Because he was a draft pick. I mean, that's the thing.
Yeah, they're going to get a lot of reps, too. Right. Jalen's not going to play more than 3-4 drives, if that.
Plus, Marcus Mariota is only on a 1-year deal, so if Tanner does look the part in the summer and doesn't pull, Carson Strong from last year, I think that's Thorson. A guy. You know, exactly. Yeah, Clayton Thorson, because like Clayton, this was a draft pick, so I can't imagine the Eagles are heading into a 6th-round pick, taking a quarterback and saying instantly, well, he's like, it's a given he's not making the 53. We just selected somebody in the draft for the practice squad. I can't imagine that was the logic. So McKee, I think, has as good a chance as anybody, regardless of position, to make this roster. So that's another big one, you know, for sure, too, to watch. But training camp kicks off tomorrow. all these guys have an opportunity still to make the 53, from 90 to 53 in a few weeks. We got you covered right here on Locked On Eagles daily as we follow along camp down in South Philly at the NovaCare complex. Make sure you subscribe on all podcast platforms and on YouTube as well. Shout out to our everydayers for making us your first listen Monday through Friday right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. For Gino Camilleri, I'm Lou DiBiase signing off as always. Thank you for downloading. Thank you for watching and listening. And let's go Birds.
Fly, Eagles, fly.